Welcome, everyone, to D-Zone's Trend Talk on coherence, coordination, and the next phase of platform engineering. I'm Jesse, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. In D-Zone's 2026 Platform Engineering and DevOps Research, we asked software professionals how platform engineering is evolving across the developer experience, delivery workflows, automation, governance, security, reliability, operating models. The report points to a market where the core delivery capabilities are already in place, but teams are still working to make those capabilities feel coherent, usable, and scalable. Today's conversation is going to focus on what that shift means in practice, like why platform engineering is becoming a coordination layer, where organizations are feeling and experiencing friction, and how leaders can balance speed, control, reliability, and developer experience without adding another layer of complexity. I'm super excited to introduce Chris to you all today, engineering manager of Go and Python tools at Datadog. Welcome, Chris.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So listen, Chris, sounds like you've been doing this tools team thing for a long time. You've been in developer experience for over a decade, and have your own YouTube channel. Like you're kind of internet famous, and you've been in the land of this whole developer experience for such a long time. We're really excited to get your expertise and your viewpoint on the topics today.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing this before it was called developer experience. It was just, somebody needs to work out all these pipelines and figure out how to get them all tied together. It's been really interesting to see it evolve over the past 10 years.
It's awesome. And, D-Zone and technology advice, we love developers. It's what we've been about for as long as I can remember. And platform engineering has started to become a response to all these different fragmented delivery systems. So I kind of want to start there with our report. And the report kind of suggests that the delivery stack has matured, which is great, but the day-to-day experience has not really become easier, more simple. Platform engineering is less as a single product category and more as this organizational response to complexity, right? So when you look at the market, what do you think is really driving the rise of platform engineering right now?
Well, I think that it's one of those things like how developer experience, before we had a name for it, was always a thing. There was always some team responsible in an organization one way or another that was going to be the proxy for developer experience. We just didn't have like a catchy name for it. In that same way, I think the developer experience is actually that platform engineering as well. Because when you're putting together all these tools and like coalescing them into one form for developers to work with, you are essentially creating a platform. It might not be a very good platform or a cohesive platform, but that's still the role that you're stepping into. And I think what's happening here, in the same way that we realized over time that DevOps really is becoming a developer experience thing, we're actually getting to the point where we're also realizing that if you're creating a developer experience, you are inherently creating a platform. And now we're getting to the point of maturity where we're able to like talk about tools and monitoring and ways of building that platform that's effective for users.
That's awesome. And so think with me for a little bit about how leaders, managers, team leads, all of that, how should they think about platform engineering through that lens, right? Operational model, governance layer, something bigger?
Yeah, I think it's the sort of thing that you'd want to take seriously like any other kind of product. With any large organization, there are external products, but there are also internal products. And the developer experience / platform engineering is its own kind of product. And in that way, you should think about it in terms of how you'd think about anything external. You'd think about things in terms of, how do I monitor this? How do I make sure people are having a good experience? What requests am I getting? What signals am I getting from my users? Just so happens that my users are internal. And I think this is a kind of thing where like overall observability into CI, for example, is so important to have, because it's the way in which you would monitor this the same way that you would monitor a service. You still care about things like latency. You care about things like responsiveness. You care about things like flakiness and whether people are having a good experience with it. So I think it's just taking a lot of the lessons that we've already learned collectively on how to be a product manager, really, or a product owner, and apply that to the idea of this internal developer platform that's being built out.
You've definitely been in it a long time if you're saying product managers and correcting to product owner. I see that. I know that. I know that life.
You caught me.
Death of the PRD. We're not going to go agile. That'll be different talk.
Mm-hmm.
So think about integrations, right? So integrations, platform capabilities. What are you seeing trends wise that's creating like more coherence without forcing every team to kind of do the same thing? Like, how are we avoiding being cookie cutter, but still serving people well?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult balance to strike. And I think one of the biggest levers that an organization can have as they're starting to mature into this, taking everything as a platform, as an actual internal product, is to take a look at the software automation that you already have. You're already going to have pipelines of some sort, whether they're happening in, like, let me rephrase that. You're always going to have pipelines of some kind, no matter what system those pipelines might be running in, no matter who's actually organizing that system for those pipelines, you're going to have them. And I think that as organizations mature, they start to realize that they have, well, frankly, too many of them. Because what ends up happening in the short term is that often teams kind of own their own automation for a long time. They're like, well, I know that this is a jar, and I want to build it in this particular way, and I want to shove it onto this server in this particular manner. And they'll start collecting other things where they want to do things like see what and they'll start doing other things where they're going to do stuff like adding integration tests or other kinds of validation to their pipeline. So you end up in a situation where you're not managing like a single unified platform. You're managing these thousands, hundreds to thousands of different small platforms that people have homegrown out of their own team.
Yeah.
I think one of the highest leverage things that anybody can do is take a look at that and start trying to unify that software delivery pipeline. It is often something that looks intractable or difficult to do, but I think it's the sort of thing that has a lot of benefit both to the organization and to the developers.
It's awesome. And that fits right in with the whole reducing complexity.
Absolutely.
I love that. And I want to talk something. There's a really interesting signal that we got in the research that platform engineering still kind of taking shape, still a little amorphous, still forming. And teams are using shared enablement models, full platform ownership models, DevOps-led approaches, siloed architectures, hybrids, you name it. This suggests organizations are adapting the idea to their own ideas of maturity, constraints, and business needs. So like, what are you seeing when you look at customers or engineering organizations? What are you seeing them struggle with as they decide, like, first of all, who should own the platform? As a DevX guy, I'm kind of interested in your take.
I think that there is a gap that needs to be crossed in the same way that we had to cross that gap. I keep pulling this back to the idea of developer experience sort of organically growing out of the needs of DevOps, right? I think platform engineering is likely growing out of the organic needs or things that developer experience was already doing, basically. And I think that first leap of realizing, oh, this is a genuine platform, we need a real platform team, is one of the hardest leaps for organizations to make. When I talk to other companies about things, I often find that there are people on either sides of that gap where either they realize that this is kind of a natural extension. If they do have one centralized team that owns this as a product, they can accelerate, they can improve developer experience, they can accelerate their delivery. And there's other organizations that are looking at this and saying like, well, probably this other team that's slightly related to something that looks like developer experience can probably take this on as an additional responsibility. So I think it's just that first realization that the centralization is important and it's useful. And I can, of course, talk about that as we continue to converse here. And actually naming that as a real thing that you want a team or centralized set of teams to own.
Okay. So assume you get your centralized platform team. How does that team, like, how do they integrate in? How do they earn trust with the other teams without becoming like another bottleneck?
Yeah.
Like we discuss bottlenecks and pipelines anytime we talk about developers. There's shift left, shift right, security, you name it. Things get shunted around. But like if you're talking about building a whole nother team, how do you make sure that they don't end up in that category?
Well, I think it is a very challenging thing to handle because no matter what happens, there's going to be a set of the developer population that's going to say, oh no, you're ruining some aspect of my creativity that I want to bring to the organization. You're going to change the way in which I'm working. And like there will be people that will be resistant to that change likely because they don't understand like what they get as a benefit for that.
Mm.
But when you're forming a platform team, I honestly believe the most important thing that you can do, both in terms of earning trust with your developer community, but also in terms of building things that are actually relevant for your users, is you have got to dog food. It is honestly the single most important thing that you can do, because you don't even know what your pain points are for your end users if you're not using the system that you've built. And oftentimes, by the time someone is complaining about something, they've been dealing with that frustration for a while, and it's something that you haven't noticed.
Yeah.
So I think dog fooding is very, very important. There's a temptation sometimes to say, well, the platform itself cannot be run by the platform, or like this is not a self-similar problem, or this needs to be handled in this other special way. Maybe you have to bootstrap it differently, but once you have a platform, you should be sending updates to it that look very similar to updates that users are sending from inside of the system itself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And we used to,
ahead.
instead of calling it dog fooding, we would say eating your own cake. Because dog food is
fantastic.
terrible. Yeah. Strawberry shortcake, whatever it is. I love it. Love the idea. But being able to use that gives you a unique perspective. I always love it when we hear that people are doing that because they find the bugs, just like you said, so much faster.
I'm going to answer that real quick then, if you don't mind. Yeah, I think I just have a preference for dog fooding because, of course, when I think about all this, I'm thinking about Datadog. So naturally, we eat our own dog
shameless
food.
Plug. I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah. So when I think about this centralized platform team that we've built, we've kind of figured out how they're going to integrate without becoming a bottleneck. Like, what should be in it? What do you centralize versus what do you keep, configurable or team owned? Like, how are we going to? It feels like that could be a struggle too.
Yeah. I mean, I've been at this for, 10 plus years now, and I still don't have a definitive answer to that question. But I think that the broad concept is this, like everything should have a centralized pipeline of some sort. Now, there will be people that are going to have to exist outside that pipeline, or they're going to have to modify aspects of that pipeline. Mm-hmm. And you can give them hooks into it. You can say like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and run your script because you have super special tests that are like specific to your particular product. Sure, go ahead. But if it takes more than X number of seconds, then I might shut that down. But I think that like a centralized build structure is one of the most important things that you can get, because it means that you can actually start answering questions about build. Like when leadership comes to you and is like, hey, deployments are slow and everybody's got a completely different deployment story or a completely different build story. It's really difficult to look at the data for all of that and make sense out of it, essentially.
Right.
Not only that, but honestly, when you get down to it, teams don't want to own that. You might occasionally have somebody who's kind of a pipeline engineer on one team or another, but for the most part, they just want to actually ship their code and deliver value to customers. They don't want to have to deal with like all the intricacies of like YAML engineering, as it is so called.
Yeah.
They mostly want all that stuff out of the way. So I think that like build and deploy pipelines are one of the easiest centralization wins. As you get further and further from that, as you get into the periphery of things like, what are people running locally on their computers, or what is it that like teams want to agree on in terms of code style, that can become more contentious and more difficult. And then I think it also has less of an easy story of just like, oh, if you do this, you're going to get such and such a win and take this burden away from people. Now, that said, awesome. There's still a lot of power in providing defaults. Defaults are incredibly powerful without actually having to go and restrict people and say, you must do it this way and we will not even touch your project if you don't do it in this particular way. Like that's not a good customer or internal customer interaction, right? Mm. Of just saying like, oh, this doesn't look like anything that we're familiar with, so we're going to ignore you. It's never a positive outcome. But what you can do instead is just encourage people to say like, hey, if you are starting out on a new project, here's a Kubernetes config that'll probably work for you, or here's a logging config that'll probably work for you, or here's a set of linters that we know are effective at preventing bugs in production. Mm. And most people are going to lean into those defaults because most people simply want to build the software. Right. And I think that's something that's often under-leveraged when people are talking about like trying to bring more conformity into a system. Consider the defaults and consider what they are and how you can deliver better ones.
Interesting. More like a service organization. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, fun fact, I started my career as a Unix build monkey back in the 90s. So I know that pain. Then developers, you're right. Don't ever want to do that. But there's a lot of things that are causing developer friction. And in our report, it didn't look like there was any one huge pain point that stuck out, right? Developer friction shows up across all the different pieces, right? Visibility, standards, cognitive load, manual work, slow feedback loops. It makes the challenge, and at least in my mind, harder to solve because the issue is just not one broken tool. It's kind of a coordination of the whole experience of delivering. So in real organizations today, what does developer friction look like? What are you seeing, especially in teams that have already invested in the DevOps, cloud automation in these teams?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different themes that I see emerging, but I think you're also right in that there's like not one silver bullet. Time to see an actual change in production, I think, is one of the most important things to both
Oh,
measure and also something that people will often find friction with, where they just want to get a change out to see whether or not it will fix something or make something better, whether they can just like A/B test it or like turn on a feature flag for somebody. And that
yeah.
process can take a long time. And that length of time can be a lot of different things. It could be tests, it could be flakes, it could be slow CI, things like that. And I think that that's one of the most important, like actual measurements of success to care about to begin with. I think that there's a challenge here, both in terms of like what the platform looks like today and about DevOps in general. Like there's always this tension about wanting to get things out safely and making sure that we're meeting standards versus making sure that things actually get out quickly. And
Right.
I think that just having a reliable set of tools and having somebody who's responsible for ensuring that those tools do not go over their time budget or error budget is really
Mm,
critical to like looking at this from an overall perspective and saying like, what is the actual thing preventing people from getting stuff out into prod? There's also the whole discussion to be had around like staging environments and promotion of artifacts and how sometimes that can be helpful or slow depending on what it is that you're working on. But there's also things to leverage there. Like I think feature flags are a fantastic thing, for example,
yeah.
just a great way of allowing people to experiment. One other trend I think I'll mention, because I think I just kind of talked about like what does the overall structure look like, and getting somebody to actually own that structure and care about those pain points is really critical, is just test flakiness. Like once you get to a
Mm,
certain organizational size, whether you're in a monorepo world or a mini repo world or whatever it is that you're doing, there's often this case where like tests are flaky. And a flaky
mhm.
test, in my opinion, is almost worse than no test at all because it's giving you a signal that is basically saying, hey, ignore me. I'm just here to stop you and prevent you from actually getting your job done. And I think that there's a lot of things out there that will like help you measure different like levels of flakiness or automatically quarantine things or even just delete them altogether. Like I think that sometimes people get very attached to their test suite when it may not be
Mhm.
providing them value,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're kind of afraid to remove it.
Yeah, the false signal. I hear it all the time on these talks. False signals to developers, super huge,
Yep.
in terms of pain. I want to talk a little bit too about competing requirements, right?
Hmm.
So the report, when it was talking about platform engineering, is this layer where competing requirements become reconciled. So organizations, they want reliable systems, stronger security, more compliance,
Yeah.
faster delivery, always, right? Cost awareness and productivity. But that creates real world trade-offs. Like you can't get that all the time, right? So how do you see organizations balance that need for standardization with the need for teams to move faster and flexible?
I think this is really interesting because this is an area where AI is starting to change the equation quite a
Uh,
bit.
okay.
I can't believe we got this far without me
I
saying the
was
word AI,
I was gonna say
but
the
but
exact
here we
same thing,
are.
but yeah.
Because of course it's changing everything about the developer
Oh, yeah.
experience across the board. But one of the nice things about having AI systems that are running continuously, things like background agents or reactive agents, is that they can go in and solve a lot of these problems on behalf of the developers without them even
Mm,
needing to interact with the system.
yeah.
This is something that I don't think has changed. Like I think the overall shape of what needs to happen hasn't really changed. Like prior to LLMs being such a big thing, I would have said that the right thing to have is a set of services that are running in the background that are like continuously
Mhm.
monitoring for various things, like whether something's out of compliance or not, whether
Yeah.
something isn't up to date, whether something needs to pull in updates, for example. But LLMs now make this a lot cheaper and easier to develop than what would have been previously, like AST parsing tooling and stuff like that. So I think we also have an opportunity here to allow teams to be a bit more flexible, to step outside of the golden path a little bit more often, because we can build these systems that will nudge them back in favor of compliance, or just notify them when something is wrong. A lot of this kind of compliance work, for example, keeping things up to date, basically maintenance work, right, is similar to the pipeline problem, stuff that developers don't really enjoy, I don't think. And it's something where if you have an automated system that can go in and handle these things intelligently for them, so long as it has high signal and it's a very trustworthy system, I think that's an opportunity to let people explore a bit more outside the golden path without like taking the entire organization off of it.
Mm-hmm. So a follow-up question on that, especially since you already brought AI into our discussion.
I did it.
So I've been guilty of being a product manager or executive that had high expectations. I don't know if you ever saw that Dilbert cartoon of having high expectations is wrong. I don't want to be right. But when you think about expectations that corporate leadership and everybody has for the platforms and what engineering teams can actually do and what they experience, like, what do you think that disconnect is between what the developers see day to day and what the expectations are that are put on these teams? And I mean, if you want, I mean, specifically with platforms, if that's helpful, like, what do they expect out of these? Let's just go back to your example. You've built this platform team. It's deployed. We've started to figure out the coherence. Like, if I'm an executive, I'm looking at this platform team. It's a new cost. It's new human beings that I'm putting in there. Like, what do I expect from that versus what those teams are going to experience day by day? Do you think that value lines up? Do you think the expectations line up for what they're going through?
I think it's a difficult thing to measure. That's been my experience, even being on platform teams, leading things like developer experience for platform teams. It's one of those things that does appear to just be a new cost for a while, because it's like, okay, this is not, I am putting money into this problem, but this isn't actually directly contributing to something like a new product actually being released from the company, right? So it's there's a real abstraction there from like the value that you're getting directly versus like the value that you're putting in. That's a huge challenge. I think that's the sort of thing where measuring stuff really comes into play, like being able to measure things like time to market, time to release an experiment, time to remediation, for example, are all things that are worth measuring and worth attributing to the platform team. And when those metrics are not matching up with expectations, that is something that needs to be feedback that is provided to platform team. And when those metrics are not matching up with expectations, that is feedback that should be provided to the platform team or platform teams. I think a good platform team is capable of making every single thing about the organization, the engineering organization in particular, better and faster and more reliable. And it's just a matter of measuring what that impact actually looks like.
Awesome. And speaking of impact, going back to AI for our next thing, this whole idea of AI-assisted automation, right? Predictive incident response, these monitoring things in the background, pipeline optimization, they're all things that people are investing in. So you're getting buy-in from the whole organization to spend money on these things. But the research also points to a little bit of a caution, which is automation can make these tasks faster while also making them harder to understand if something goes wrong, like the whole break glass in case of emergency type of analogy. So like, where do you see automation creating the most practical value in platform engineering, like right now today?
So in terms of practical value, I mean, I'm seeing it firsthand. Things like mass migrations are a huge thing, because for one reason or another, whether you're upgrading from like one major version to another in a library that's often used across the organization, whether you are changing the structure of a project, whether you're changing the entire topology of like what all projects look like in an organization, that is all time that is not spent actually engineering or building new things. It's stuff that developers don't like to do. It's things that a platform team has struggled with in the past, because a good platform team should be doing as much of this migration work as possible on behalf of the developers. Since it's not actually relating to their day-to-day, it's not actually relating to product improvements, and they have their own roadmap that they need to hit, right? Throwing AI into the mix has made migrations like certain migrations that would have been deemed impossible or too costly, very possible and very cheap. But I also want to caution something here too, which is like, if you just throw AI at something and try to give it a goal, it will try to meet that goal without caring too much about feedback, typically. Like, if you don't tell it, hey, this test must pass, or this CI needs to go green, it will get to the point where it thinks it's done a good enough job and describe what it's done and explain why it's done a good enough job, but it doesn't actually solve the real problem. And there's a couple of different ways to deal with that. One of them is to make sure that everything that you're doing with AI is goal oriented. You need to give it a signal like the CI needs to go green, or you need to give it a signal like this dependency is no longer present, something like that. The other thing that you can do, and something that I don't see done often enough that I've found really impactful, is to play AIs off against each other. If you have one agent whose job it is to perform a migration or do a complex task, have it ask another agent whether or not it's actually accomplished that task, or even spin up an adversarial agent that says, prove that this hasn't actually happened. And if you have that interplay between agents, you end up getting a situation where it's more likely that the goal that you've given it will actually be met. And it is also more likely that the code or the things that have been written as a result of that, whether that's code or configuration is what I'm really thinking about here, is going to be more clean. If you have an AI that has to explain itself to another agent, and that agent is critical enough of its work, it will often reduce the complexity of what has come out instead of adding to it.
That's awesome. That's great. And we've talked a little bit about coherence and pulling things together with the platform teams, which that was absolutely the biggest takeaway of our report, right? So we addressed that earlier. But we have one more question I kind of want to get to before we wrap things up, as we're pushing up against our time here. But if you're going to look ahead, and we have tons of people who are going to watch this, like, what is one thing, one action that engineering or technology leaders can't afford to ignore over the next year as platform engineering becomes central to software delivery? Like, what is the one thing you would say, don't miss this?
I mean, honestly, I would point towards what my previous answer was. Like, this is the age of LLMs, whether we like it or not. And I happen to quite enjoy what they're doing for us and for our automation. But it's going to have an impact on everything. It's going to have an impact on code velocity. It's going to have an impact on code quality. It's going to have an impact on how frequently people are hitting the platform, whether that's a platform that is related to like CI or pipelines, whether it's just hitting different compliance tools, whether it's just the sheer number of projects or experiments that are going to go out into your production environment, because now it's much cheaper to experiment. You cannot afford to not think about your own LLM strategy, because even if you are not using them, I can guarantee you that other parts of your organization are, and that's going to impact velocity. It's going to impact things like stability. And there's an opportunity here, like I was talking about earlier in the conversation about defaults. You can provide people good defaults for LLMs. You can provide them an agents.md file. You can provide them a set of skills that you would prefer that they use when they're building out new projects or new technologies. Like, there is an opportunity for you to get on the ground floor and put these defaults in place and put these structures in place, because if you don't do it, somebody else will, and you might not like what defaults it is that they come out with.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, Chris, listen, thank you so much for joining us today. Great references, great advice. Thank you, everyone out there, for tuning in. If you want to learn more, you can download the full platform engineering and DevOps research from dzone.com. If you're not already a member, head on over and give us a join, like our stuff. And our community has tons of research, technical resources, expert perspectives, just like this, on modern software delivery. And it's all available for you at dzone.com. Until next time, see you then.